Hi, I'm Andy Duncan, and the t-shirt I'm wearing today is from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, a terrific museum that I hope you all get the chance to visit in person or online. This video and the follow-up video are going to be about first and last sentences, which obsess me. Certainly in any prose work, fiction or nonfiction of any length, I am always first looking at the first sentence and then looking at the last sentence. And it's remarkable, by the way, how few spoilers are contained in a final sentence. But never mind that. I think flash fiction is a particularly good opportunity to look closely at first and last sentences because they're so close together. There's so little, relatively little material between the opening and the closing. And while an opening and a closing are not necessarily paired like bookends, to pair them like bookends, to have the closing somehow complement or complete or follow up on the opening, when it works, is a very satisfying sort of structure for one's work, fiction or nonfiction. And we should always remember that the points of maximum possible impact in any piece of writing, and this works fractally. It's true of sentences, it's true of paragraphs, it's true of pages. It's certainly true of complete pieces. The 2 points of impact are the beginning and the end. So I'm accompanying these videos with some links to some recently published flash pieces where I think the first and last sentences are really interesting to look at. So here we go. This video and the next one will be a little longer than usual, but that's all right. Please feel free to skip around or and certainly to use the links that you'll get to follow along with the story. So let me begin with Zabe Bent's story, Sela Thief. And the first sentence is, Sela held her power tight, cranked up her headset, and sauntered into the corner market. That's the sentence. Let's start with the verbs. Held, cranked, sauntered. That's a lot of activity for an individual in a single sentence. Sela is an active person, a person who does things. Sela held her power tight. Well, this could mean her power is precious to her, a beloved, something to be cherished as a parent may hold tight a child. But it also could mean she's reining it in, holding it tight as one would a leash with a snarling dog straining the other end. That reading, the one of growing tension as a surging force is held in check, is underscored by cranked up her headset. A headset, after all, is a beautiful metaphor for an internal racket that is not readily apparent to the outside world. So she's holding her power tight, even as she's cranking things up. This may seem contradictory, but is not. Both the holding and the cranking are consistent with someone who is fully charged, buzzing with possibility. In only 9 words, Sela is humming like a battery, and so is her story. How exhilarating, then, is the verb that follows. She sauntered. That's the cracking electric casualness of a model on the runway, a star taking the stage, a Wimbledon finalist taking a pull from a water bottle with an utter awesome physical command beyond the ken of most mortals. Sela knows walking in that she's the locus of power in this shop, in this story, perhaps in this world, and we, the readers, know exactly how she feels because we feel it too. Incidentally, I have no idea whether I'm pronouncing Sela the way the author intended. I apologize if I am not. But I could not resist pronouncing it as many peoples, including my people, might pronounce the word seller, Seller, because a seller is a nice counterweight to a thief, and having the two words share a title puts us instantly into a retail environment because that's where selling and stealing both happen, sometimes simultaneously. Now let's jump to the last sentence. She paid them no mind as she crossed the street and entered the park, just as they dissipated into the cool night air. The verbs conveying Sela's actions here, paid, crossing, and entered, might initially strike us as surprisingly mild compared to that opening cranked and sauntered. Although note here again how well the verb paid fits with the retail environment discussed earlier. But see how well these three verbs follow through from the opening. This person of power is walking out of the story with a thrumming indifference to all who are left behind. It is Wimbledon after the demigods have left the court. It's as if by force of will, Sela had been holding this story together, and now her attention has moved on, and so the story and its readers too are left to dissipate in the cool night air. That first sentence was all heat. The final sentence is all coolness, the coolness of particles separating, the coolness of space. All right, very different story, but also highly recommended. Alex E. Harrow's The Ransom of Miss Coraline Connolly. Now, immediately, some of you will accuse me of a dirty bit of cheating, but I will explain at length over drinks someday, if you are buying, why the salutation of a letter is part of the letter's first sentence. For now, just bear with me. First sentence. To the parents or guardians of Miss Coraline Connolly. Right now you're thinking, where is she? Because this is what every parent thinks when they find an empty crib and a raven with a scroll in its beak. This is one of those happy first sentences that makes me laugh out loud, because all our expectations of a horrific Lindbergh-type child abduction story go poof. We realize. This is more of a fairy abduction, but it's a comic one. The ransom note takes a disarmingly chatty, matter-of-fact tone. It assumes fairy abductions happen every day, and from the point of view of the letter writer, they do. In fact, they happen so often that this is a standardized ransom note, a form letter. As always with form letters, the salutation is the tip-off. Instead of the antiquated but still common, dear sir or madam, we get to the parents or guardians. The letter writer neither knows nor cares whether Coraline has parents. Anyone the letter reaches will do. And we can't leave the opening behind without noting how intertextual it is. How it makes certainly one nod, and to me, two more nods to specific pre-existing texts. And I say specific because I'm leaving out, of course, all that fairy lore and all those explications of and riffs on fairy lore, and the whole rich subgenre of writing that is the ransom note, studied mainly by criminologists and true crime writers, one of whom really should do an anthology. And of course, I'm leaving out all those other epistolary stories that take the form of letters, telegrams, emails, text messages, and so forth, found materials, which every author invokes whenever they begin a story with a salutation. No, I'm talking about three specific texts. The obvious one is O. Henry's comic 1907 story, The Ransom of Redchief, which has permeated U.S. culture to such an extent that you've been exposed to versions of it repeatedly, even if you've never read it or never heard of it before. Less obvious, perhaps even debatable, Neil Gaiman's Coraline, which began, Neil Long has said, as a typo when he intended to set down the far more common name, Caroline. Here we have another Coraline. And two, George R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series, better known by its HBO title, in which messages between faux medieval powers and principalities are more or less constantly being dispatched via ravens, a convenience that never got any more plausible. Did all of the above actually cross my mind as I read that opening sentence? Not at a conscious level, no. But it was all present for me nevertheless, as the smile spread on my face and the chuckle welled up, and I knew I was in the good hands of a witty writer whose influences well up constantly and tickle my nose when they burst like bubbles in champagne. The last sentence. P.S. I would be obliged if you would pack the purple cup and Mr. Tiger this time. Other than noting this is a fine punchline, I have nothing more here to say except that an epistolary story beginning with an introductory salutation necessarily ends with a postscript. We've gone from the formal opening to the formal conclusion, from the top of the page to the bottom, and that sort of matched set is as deeply satisfying to the reader as a pair of bookends. All right, finally for this video, Across the Ice by Ada Hoffmann. Here is the deceptively simple first sentence. I fasten my skates. Now we've all felt this sort of determination at the beginning of any task, however simple or complex. First things first. I roll up my sleeves. I take pen in hand. I pick up the shovel. Pick your favorite metaphor, but they all have the same meaning. I get to work. In this case, I fasten my skates. The sentence is so simple, in fact, that we read complexity into it. We may immediately envision an individual putting on their skates, perhaps silently, perhaps alone, which would suggest deliberation, resolution, determination. Some challenge may be implied. Is any plot implied by these four words? Yes. As I've been belaboring the obvious all along, my conscience is clear when I point out that while we don't know much, we have every expectation that the plot of this story will involve an act of skating. And so the last sentence. I step into position, fling out my arms, and spin and spin and spin. The story began with stillness, with only the tiny gestures involved in donning a pair of skates. And it ends, as it should, in a whirl of action, a blur of activity. Remember, too, that putting on skates, even more than putting on most other types of footwear, is a matter of tightening, of constriction, because the things need to stay put. So the story also goes from an almost clenched intensity to an ending of arm-flinging abandon. It's exhilarating, even if we know nothing about ice skating. Those who do know something about ice skating, however, know that spins are terrifically technically complex and also full of meaning for the performer. Often, for example, they are transition phases, way stations in a routine before the skater goes on to bigger things. One more thought. I found myself wondering, why the three final commas in this sentence? The first comma, the one after position, is hard to avoid, but many writers would leave off the others. I suppose there are grammatical reasons for leaving them in, but because I am guided less by grammar than by the sound and feel and look of things on the page, I will note here only my reading aloud the sentence with commas is more satisfying than reading it aloud without. And those recurring commas look like the visual punctuation you get when watching a first-rate skater in a spin, as the tassel at their hip or whatever ornament they are wearing seems to flicker like a candle flame. And with that, I will snuff the candle flame of this video. Thanks for listening.